Imagine, just for a second, that you're sitting in a room with three brilliant, really passionate people.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So on your left is this ancient cloaked alchemist, right?
Yeah.
Mutters about the movements of the stars, all that.
Right, right.
And then on your right is a modern astrophysicist crunching complex equations. And sitting directly across from you is a devout theologian.
Wow, so quite the tense dinner party.
Exactly. I mean, the convention tells you that these three should absolutely be at each other's throats.
Oh, definitely. They represent, like, the absolute opposites in our modern world. Magic, science, religion.
Yeah, but what if you sit there for a few minutes and suddenly realize they aren't arguing at all?
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, what if you realize they're actually reciting the exact same poem, just, in three entirely different languages?
Oh, wow. That is a phenomenal way to frame the premise we are exploring today.
Right. It kind of blew my mind a little.
It really does, because we are so heavily conditioned to view these disciplines as a zero-sum game.
Yeah, totally.
Like, the prevailing logic is that if science wins, well, magic loses. If a specific religion is absolutely true, then contradictory scientific models must be flawed.
It's always a competition.
Exactly. But that entire conflict assumes they are competing for the exact same territory,
Right.
rather than describing the exact same landscape from different elevations, and through different lenses.
And breaking down that artificial conflict, that is our mission for today's deep dive.
I'm really excited for this one.
Me too. We are looking at this lyrical, incredibly dense transcript titled The Doctrine, Volume 1.
It's a fascinating text.
It really is. It's an exploration of an idea known as the perennial philosophy.
Right, the perennial seed.
Yeah. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, it's basically the proposition that there is a single, forgotten seed of truth underlying every single human creed.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking about a text that dares to ask this massive question. What if the ancient rituals of early humanity, modern math, and holy scriptures are all just scattered fragments of one shattered mirror?
What's fascinating here is that the source text refuses to fall into the trap of asking us to choose between faith and reason.
Yeah, doesn't play that game.
Not at all. It explicitly rejects that binary. Instead, it speaks of faith and reason reconciled in the wisdom lost and wild.
I love that phrasing, wisdom lost and wild.
It's beautiful. It challenges you as the listener to reconsider the foundational stories of human history.
Right.
The core argument is that the logos, which is a term the text uses to describe this living divine logic, isn't the exclusive property of a church or a lab.
Yeah, it's like the fundamental operating system of the universe.
Exactly, and it belongs to anyone who knows how to look for it.
So let's start right at the root of that search. The source paints a really vivid picture of humanity's earliest attempts to understand this operating system.
Yeah, it goes way back.
And it uses a really provocative phrase, right? It calls magic the mother's hand nursing faith in every land.
It is such a striking image.
It really is.
Mainly because, well, our modern definition of magic is so thoroughly corrupted. Like cheap tricks.
Right. When we hear the word magic today, we think of parlor tricks.
Yeah.
We think of illusions, sleight of hand, rabbits pulled out of hats.
Kids' birthday parties, basically.
Exactly. But this document is pointing to a much older, much more profound definition.
Right.
Ancient magic wasn't about deception or, cheap entertainment. It was an intuitive, raw grasp of natural laws.
Mm-hmm.
It was the very first human attempt to observe cause and effect, millennia, before we had microscopes or institutional doctrines.
The text describes it as a hidden order working quietly.
Right.
So in this view, early magic wasn't a defiance of the divine. It was actually the original search for it.
Exactly.
And to ground this in history, the document brings up a really specific, highly recognizable example, the Magi.
Ah, yes.
The three wise men from the biblical nativity story.
The Magi serve as the ultimate bridge in this narrative. The transcript is very deliberate in using them as a case study.
It's such a perfect example. It describes these ancient figures as following reason's flame and an astronomical anomaly to find the logos walking among men.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is where the traditional boundaries we build between these disciplines just totally collapse.
They really do.
You have these Persian astrologers. They are essentially practitioners of ancient magic and early observational science.
Right, they're watching the stars.
Yeah, they are using their celestial charts and math to locate the central figure of what would become a major world religion.
It's an incredible synthesis.
and they're described as no enemies of faith, but rather watchers of a deeper way. It kind of makes me think of looking at the universe through a glass prism.
Oh, I like that. A prism is an excellent analogy.
Yeah.
Let's trace how that works with these different disciplines.
So think about a beam of pure white light hitting a glass prism.
Okay.
As soon as it hits the glass, it fractures into a spectrum of distinct colors, red, blue, yellow, green.
Right, the full spectrum.
Now imagine a scientist studying the red light. They measure its specific wavelength, they note it carries heat, and they build a factual framework around that.
Makes sense.
Meanwhile, a theologian is standing in the blue light. They observe that blue light illuminates shadows differently, carries different energy, and they build dogma around the blue wavelengths.
And then the fighting starts.
Exactly. They argue bitterly because the red light and the blue light genuinely behave differently.
Right.
The scientist says the theologian is delusional. The theologian says the scientist is blind.
But they're both looking at the same source.
Right. If they just traced those colored beams backward through the prism, they would see that both colors converge into the exact same unbroken beam of pure white light.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. And that really explains the profound tragedy of the next era the text describes.
The severing.
Yeah, because if these disciplines all share the exact same root, if they're all just different frequencies of that same white light, we have to confront a very uncomfortable historical reality.
Yeah, it gets pretty dark.
Why did the narrative fracture? If science, magic, and faith are siblings, why do we view them historically as mortal enemies who spent centuries burning each other at the stake?
It's wild.
Yeah.
And the text doesn't shy away from the brutality of that shift either.
No, it doesn't.
It takes a really dark turn, describing a period where this unified understanding, this high science, became a kind of wisdom turned to crime.
Hmm.
The imagery is haunting. It talks about a dance in the devil's ring, detailing how magicians and seekers were suddenly cast as nameless monsters and driven into exile.
It's tragic. To understand the why behind this persecution, we really have to look at the intersection of human psychology and systemic crisis.
Right.
The text illustrates a classic scapegoat mechanism. It notes, the harvest died in silent rows, the cattle fell like rain, and someone had to bear the mark of nature's hidden pain.
Wow. So like a village is starving because of a drought, or a plague sweeps through a medieval city.
Exactly.
People are absolutely terrified, and they just desperately need to regain a sense of control.
Precisely. And, this is rooted in hard behavioral science.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the human brain is notoriously bad at processing complex systemic failures. A bacterial plague or a shifting climate pattern is invisible.
Right. It's totally abstract.
And you can't fight an abstraction with a sword. So when faced with that level of existential dread, society desperately needs a simple narrative.
They need a bad guy.
They need a physical target to punish. The complex truth of a cosmic order where nature just does its thing is way too abstract.
But the eccentric watcher of the stars on the edge of town.
Or the woman who understands herbal medicine. They are concrete.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Burning a supposed witch at the stake provides an immediate, visceral illusion of control. It basically gives the terrifying chaos a face.
That makes total sense. I understand the psychological comfort of a scapegoat during a famine, but I do want to push back a little on the idea that this persecution was purely driven by, panicked peasants.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because the text drops this incredibly heavy line. It says, "Truth is terror when proclaimed."
Yes.
That implies something much more systemic than just bad harvests, doesn't it?
It really does.
It suggests that people, specifically people in power, are naturally hostile to cosmic truths because it shatters their comfortable walls of certainty.
Absolutely.
Even today, paradigm-shifting ideas are attacked by the establishment. So, was this historical severing less about crops dying and more about institutions protecting their monopoly on the truth?
That is the deeper and really the more insidious layer of the conflict.
Right.
Institutions, whether we're talking about ancient monarchies, medieval theocracies, or even modern academic paradigms, build their authority on the premise that they have all the answers.
Yeah, they have to be the ultimate authority.
Exactly. So if a unified truth exists that transcends their specific doctrines, a perennial seed that anyone can access without their permission,
That's a huge threat.
it is inherently destabilizing. The text notes that authorities fear the truth they could not see. Truth is terror when proclaimed, because it renders the traditional gatekeepers completely obsolete.
Which means, if you're a scholar holding on to this perennial seed, you suddenly have a massive target on your back.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just shout your findings from the town square without literally risking your life.
Right, and when truth becomes fatal to speak aloud, it has an evolutionary imperative to adapt.
It has to hide.
It goes underground. As the transcript outlines, this ancient wisdom clothes itself in symbols to survive the purges. It wraps its voice in metaphors and hieroglyphs to soften the fear of the authorities.
And this brings us to such a fascinating survival strategy: alchemy.
Yes, the alchemists.
According to the text, they spoke in riddles softly so no outsider could name their work.
Right.
Now, the pop culture image of an alchemist is usually, a greedy, slightly delusional guy in a dark basement, desperately trying to turn lead into gold to get rich.
Which is exactly the cover story they desperately wanted the authorities to believe.
That's amazing.
The host material provides a massive revelation about the true nature of alchemy. It states quite explicitly, gold was never metal.
Oh, wow. Gold was never metal.
Never.
So the physical experiments, the boiling flasks, the sulfur burning, it was all a brilliantly constructed coded language.
Exactly. The text explains that the real furnace wasn't made of clay and stone.
What was it?
It was the furnace of the soul. And the true gold they were trying to produce was consciousness awakened and spirit refined.
That is wild. I mean, think about it like modern data encryption.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Like if you're living under a heavily oppressive regime today, you don't send an unencrypted email saying, let's organize a revolution.
No, the state algorithms would flag it immediately.
Exactly. Instead, you encrypt the message. You use steganography to hide the text of your manifesto inside the code of, like a harmless image file of a cat.
Right.
To the government sensor scanning the network, it just looks like you're sharing pet photos.
That's brilliant.
So the alchemists effectively encrypted the perennial philosophy into the language of metallurgy and chemistry.
It is a highly functional camouflage.
It really is.
Because if the power-hungry inquisitors kick down your door and find you writing treatises about the liberation of the human spirit, or the direct access to the divine logos,
They execute you for heresy.
instantly. But if they kick down your door and see you boiling lead surrounded by cryptic diagrams, scribbling about creating endless physical wealth...
They just think you're a greedy chemist.
Exactly. A monarch might even fund your laboratory, completely missing the spiritual revolution happening right under their nose.
That is just incredible. But, alchemy still requires a laboratory, it requires wealth, specialized equipment, literacy.
That's true.
If this perennial seed is truly a universal truth meant for humanity, it couldn't just survive in the basements of privileged scholars.
Mm-hmm.
It needed a vehicle that could move freely among the common people, completely undetected by the gatekeepers.
And that leads us to the most astonishing disguise mentioned in the text.
I couldn't believe this part.
A disguise so perfect, so incredibly mundane, that it hid the literal blueprints of the universe in plain sight amid kings and fools and paper swords.
We are talking about the tarot.
Yes.
The source describes these ancient, sacred symbols being left to fall like coins of brass on sticky cavern boards.
Right.
You have careless gamblers drinking wine, slamming these cards down on a table, having absolutely no idea they are playing a game with a scattered secret book.
The contrast there is staggering.
It really is.
To take the highest, most elevated calculus of spirit and hide it in the lowest, most common denominator of society, a simple tavern game.
Because nobody burns a deck of playing cards for heresy.
Exactly. It's just a pastime for the night. But the text completely strips away that mundane veneer.
Yeah, it elevates it.
It describes the tarot not as fortune-telling trifles, which is how it's often dismissed today, but as a science of relations and a sacred geometry.
I really want to drill down into the mechanics of that, because how exactly does a deck of cards function as a sacred geometry?
Well, the text mentions 22 eternal paths, or letters.
Okay, right.
Those 22 paths correspond to the 22 major arcana cards of the tarot deck. The text connects this to a universal alphabet of heaven and earth. It is essentially a primitive, eternal sign system of human thought that predates the written word.
Wow.
Think of it like a periodic table of the human experience. Just as a chemist knows combining hydrogen and oxygen makes water, the tarot operates as an analog computer for the soul.
So like taking a specific card, like the hermit, which the text mentions walking alone with his lantern.
Exactly. The hermit isn't just a cool picture of an old man.
Right.
It represents the fundamental structural archetype of introspection, isolation, and the search for inner truth.
And the priestess.
The priestess represents intuition and the guarding of the veil between the known and the unknown.
Okay, I see.
When you lay these cards out in relation to one another, you aren't predicting the future. You are creating a mathematical model of a psychological or spiritual dilemma.
You're finding a structural solution.
Yes, you're combining the archetypes to solve a human problem.
And the text points out this incredible linguistic puzzle that reinforces the idea. The anagram of Torah and Rhoda.
Ah, yes. This is a crucial mechanism for understanding the deep dive here.
Let's hear it.
Torah translates to the law or the divine instruction. Rhoda translates to the turning wheel.
Okay.
The text suggests that the tarot is the rhoda, the turning wheel of archetypes. It implies that the divine law, the Torah, was visually encoded into the turning wheel of the tarot.
Every sign a number. Every number law.
Exactly. It suggests that if you know how to read the symbolic language, you can spin the wheel of these 22 letters to navigate any philosophical crisis.
It is staggering to consider. A silent book of everything since the primal birth, surviving centuries of purges and wars simply because everyday people just wanted to play a tavern game.
It speaks to the unbelievable resilience of this perennial seed.
It really does.
As the transcript says, nothing written is lost, nothing spoken is gone. Even when humanity forgot the original language of the Logos, the signs remain.
The keys to understanding the universe were never actually lost. They were resting in our hands, on our tavern tables the entire time. You know, the journey of this knowledge, this constant hiding and seeking, it comes with a profound personal cost.
Oh, absolutely.
Living in a fractured world where science, magic, and religion are forced into separate, hostile camps takes a toll.
Mm.
And the text ends by focusing on a specific historical figure to show that cost.
Julian the Apostate.
Yeah.
A deeply compelling and tragic figure to end on.
He possessed the ultimate temporal power, tried to put the shattered mirror back together, and still failed.
Right.
The text introduces him as the lonely Roman emperor who had a scholar's mind. He loved the tales the ancient poets told and the symbols the early mystics carved.
Julian's reign in the 4th century perfectly encapsulates the internal conflict of the seeker.
How so?
Well, he was crowned as the absolute ruler of Rome, an empire that had recently established Christianity as its dominant centralized power center. But in his heart, the text notes, the ancient love was never left undone. Julian was a Neoplatonist. He looked at the ancient Hellenic mysteries, the old gods, and the new Christian theology, and he recognized the white light in the prism.
He saw the connection.
He saw that the old rituals and the new faith were ultimately pointing toward the exact same divine source.
So he tried to build an umbrella. He tried to synthesize these worlds.
Right.
He basically wanted to say to the empire, hey, the philosophical magic of the ancients and the logos of the new church, they're dialects of the same truth.
But Rome fundamentally rejected him.
Yeah. The text says, Rome had turned another way, the cross stood tall and great.
He was rejected because a synthesis of that magnitude is a bureaucratic nightmare for a ruling establishment.
Oh, totally.
Institutions need clear, distinct boundaries to maintain power and collect tithes. If everything is everything, if the ancient philosopher and the new priest are accessing the same divine seed, who does the citizen owe their allegiance to?
That makes total sense.
Julian's tragedy is that he was caught entirely between eras. He was too late to openly celebrate the ancient mysteries, and centuries too early to see the modern scientific validation of a unified cosmos.
He was crushed by the political machinery of his historical moment.
Exactly.
It's a sober reminder that while the truth might be eternal, human institutions are fiercely defensive of their borders.
They certainly are.
So let's pull all these incredible threads together. We started with this massive premise, a single, forgotten seed of unity underlying all human thought. We explored how the intuitive magic of early humanity and the mathematical astronomy of the ancient magi were simply early dialects of that one truth.
And we examine how human fear, triggered by systemic crises and a psychological need for a scapegoat, drove that unified wisdom into the shadows.
Right.
We saw how institutions, terrified by a truth they couldn't control, forced the perennial philosophy to adapt.
Forcing it to encrypt the awakening of human consciousness behind the chemical smoke and bubbling flasks of alchemy, and forcing the sacred geometry of the universe to hide inside the careless, wine-stained card games of the tarot.
Beautifully said.
The ultimate takeaway from the doctrine, the insight that answers our initial question, is that science, magic, and religion are not rivals.
They never were.
They are simply one truth spoken in many languages. The keys to the universe were never lost.
They are simply waiting for the patient's soul willing to learn the vocabulary.
Yeah.
And that leaves us with a fascinating, perhaps slightly unsettling thought to walk away with.
Oh, let's hear it.
We've just spent this deep dive seeing how ancient seekers successfully hid the very blueprints of reality inside a common deck of playing cards and the rudimentary chemistry of base metals.
Right.
It forces you to look at your own surroundings with a completely different lens.
How so?
Well, what entirely mundane object in your everyday life right now, something you overlook or discard every single day, might secretly be holding a map to the divine, just waiting for you to learn its language?
Oh, wow. What a question to leave on.
It's something to think about.
We spend so much of our lives arguing over which language is the right one, you know?
Yeah.
The empirical science, the established religion, the intuitive magic. We forget to just step back and look at the unbroken light.
Mm.
We're still those three people arguing in a room, completely missing the fact that we're holding different pieces of the exact same shattered mirror.
Exactly.
Keep looking for the connections, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
They set a crown upon his head. They called him Rome's own son. Yet in his heart the ancient lie was never left undone.